everyone. Welcome to this meeting of the Safe, Vibrant, and Healthy Community Committee. We have 3 agenda items today. The first is 1909 food truck zones, operating hours. The second is panhandling, pedestrian interference, and the third is homelessness. We will start with the food truck zones.
Mayor, I think that order got reversed and panhandling is actually queued up for first.
Then we will do panhandling first.
There you are. Thank you.
Good morning.
Hi, Dottie.
This is Dottie Kibler, and I'm going to start the item this morning with a summary of state law and city code provisions concerning begging. State law regulations are relatively few. There are 2 statutes, one that governs begging while intoxicated, and the other that governs soliciting on medians and shoulders of state highways and streets that impede normal traffic movement. There are general laws that police officers across the state use for conduct associated with begging, communicating threats, assault statutes, and trespass statutes when begging occurs on private property, contrary to the property owner controller's desires. State law delegates and authorizes local governments to regulate begging, and the city has done that in 2 ways. First, it has a free permit requirement. That permit is obtained through the police department. Second, there are restrictions on begging that are focused on public safety problems and issues. In essence, 5 different categories of public safety restrictions. One that eliminates aggressive begging, another that regulates obstruction of traffic or pedestrians, the third that prohibits begging in places where people are likely to be intimidated, the fourth, specific behaviors that the city has encountered over the years that are problematic, such as getting too close to someone without permission, and finally, fraudulent behavior. So in general, begging is permitted throughout the city so long as a person complies with these regulations.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any report from staff?
Chief Deck Brown will now bring forward the presentation from RPD.
Good afternoon, Mayor and others.
Good morning, Chief.
I'm going to share my screen as well. Having a little bit of technical difficulty. Give me 1 second. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your patience. So panhandling basically remains a quality of life issue that impacts the community and those whose circumstances lead them to panhandle. A balanced approach is how we have tried to address the issue here in our city. And so we look at that approach as a form of enforcement, education, and engagement. And it has to be central to trying to address the greater strategy of such a challenge. The act of panhandling, as you can see, is basically the in-person solicitation. And I'm certain that many of us on this meeting today have either seen it or experienced it on some level. And while panhandling is typically addressed on our district level, it is so important also that that we look at the overall facet of of homelessness and the begging issue, which is why, and I'll speak briefly about that a little later, but you all know that early in the year, I came before you regarding our program Acorns. Just to give you an overview of some data, with us being a data-driven department, as such, we have assessed, and what you have before you are basically the last 3 years of activity and calls for service as it relates to panhandling and begging here in our city. And you will see that the chart shows a slight fluctuation between the calls over those 3 years, with a slight dip in 2019 and a slight increase in 2020. The second chart that you see there really speaks to the enforcement action. And so over the number, when you look at the number of citations, they have actually decreased from year to year. And you'll also notice that as it relates to the overall number of arrests, they really are, that's a small number compared to the overall number of encounters. And as you can see, it increased in from 2019 to 2020 by 4 arrests. And of the 1,596 panhandling and begging encounters that we had in 2020, basically 10.15% resulted in some enforcement action. To just sort of follow up a little bit on some of the comments that Dottie just referenced, our city attorney, you know, there again, I think we have to recognize, and she started out with that very point, that panhandling is protected in some form by either state law or city ordinance with specific provisions, as she referenced, including a free permit that's actually obtained through the Raleigh Police Department. And panhandling and begging is prohibited at certain locations and during certain specific times. As Dottie further referenced, and then what you have before you is the general statute, one of the general statutes, and the City of Raleigh City Code Section 13/2007 that specifically speaks to the free permit as well as the location. And she referenced that location was one of those areas whereby this ordinance governs. But to add a little further, a little more to that, panhandling is not allowed between the hours of sunset and sunrise, and not earlier than 8 a.m. and no later than 8 p.m. And those locations that she referenced where people are most likely to convene would include school zones during school time, within 20 feet of a bus stop, train station, or taxi zone, within 100 feet of an ATM, and within 100 feet of any open financial institution, within 20 feet of an open commercial establishment, and 20 feet within any permitted outdoor dining during business hours, as well as a residence or residential building. As it relates to access and circumstances, I would like to take a moment just to reiterate that our department has been very intentional about not endorsing or engaging in enforcement, in an enforcement-only approach. We are focused on really trying to find those ways and to address other issues that do lead individuals to believe that this is their only option in meeting their basic human needs. So we've accessed and continue to assess the circumstances surrounding those areas that are sort of the undertone or the other reasons that are relating to homelessness in general. And so the goal is to be able to connect them to the various resources in order to address those underlying issues. As I came before you, before our council earlier last year, it was specific to dealing with some of what we see in the homeless community, which lends itself to begging, as well as a number of other issues specific to panhandling as well. And so the creation of Acorns was established, which is comprised of personnel who, including our social workers, to reflect on determining the issues surrounding that particular crisis and how we can address that and connect individuals to the various needs who are experiencing homelessness, who are living with mental illness and substance use disorders. And so we're excited about that team. And by the way, we posted for those positions yesterday for social workers. So we will begin that process of selecting those folk and moving that initiative forward as well. That is what I have on panhandling. Are there any other questions regarding same?
Chief, if you could take down your, then I can see everybody. Thank you. You see here. Are there any questions from the council? Councilor Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Chief, for being with us today. Your memo and the data was very helpful. I am curious, and you could do this maybe in an update to the memo or a follow-up later on, but if you have it, I'm curious how many permits we issued in the 3 years that you looked at.
I will get you that number. I've asked for the same, so I'm waiting on the data.
Thank you. And related topic, how do these permits get issued? Do people have to go somewhere? Do officers write them on the side of the road when they find somebody who's looking for a permit?
Typically, someone comes usually into the downtown district station, and that is usually where they are issued. Some are issued at other district stations. However, the majority do come out of the downtown district. And that has been historic in our department.
Thank you. And Mayor, if I could, just one more.
Yes.
Chief, I think you touched on this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, in case maybe this brings to light some more information that might be helpful to us. So I noticed that in 2019, as you said, the calls for panhandling and begging were down, but it looks like citations and arrests didn't go down as much as the calls. Do you have any insights on what looks like fewer calls but more enforcement actions in 2019? Can you provide any insights on that?
I don't. Sometimes it really just depends on the level of aggression and some of those other factors that our city attorney referenced. I think she covered traffic, aggressive panhandling, the location, the behavior, and fraudulent activities as well. And so not having the specifics before me, but I can probably provide you with the specifics on that. But it most likely would have centered around those particular areas for enforcement. I know that we have had some instances, and I do recall specifics last year, and some of that, it's hard to say if it's directly COVID related, but I know that we had several complaints in and around the downtown area specific to some aggressive panhandling, because I believe it actually came up in a council meeting or two as well.
Yeah, when I had meetings with Bill King with our business owners, there was a great deal of concern expressed about aggressive panhandling. And I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that when the streets were busy, you did not see, or people did not see our homeless population. When the streets were empty, they did. And one of the things this has done for me is really demonstrated the lack of resources that we actually have. And that's why homelessness is the third item on our agenda today. Councilmember Cox, I saw you with your hand raised.
So a couple of questions. I was wondering how Raleigh differs from surrounding communities. So for example, in terms of safety, I know when I go to Durham, I see people who are panhandling, but they're wearing reflective vests. And I'm wondering why is that happening there, but not in Raleigh? And another issue is related to panhandling are homeless camps. I hear people report to me repeatedly about homeless camps near Triangle Town Center, near the 401 US 1 split, and other locations throughout town. And I was wondering what our policies are regarding homeless camps and how we're addressing that issue as well.
Could we discuss that in our third agenda item? I think that's a very valid point, Councillor Cox. But trying to keep this discussion confined to this and the broader discussion on homelessness later, if that's okay.
Can I answer the first part of his question as it relates to the traffic vest, though? Because that's probably more the panhandling piece. And actually, Mr. Cox, we see many of our homeless folk in our communities with traffic vests as well. I can't speak to what's going on in Durham, but I have seen more and more of even our panhandlers with traffic vests, particularly those that are in and around the intersections.
I see it on Glenwood Avenue a lot.
Yeah.
Councilmember Buffkin.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief comment. It's interesting to me that at least my personal observation has been, and I'm curious if the data would bear this out, that panhandling has a different character in different parts of the city. The mayor was speaking mostly to a downtown setting, I think. And Mr. Cox has probably experienced more of what I see in the panhandling focuses in North Raleigh. It's mostly around major interchanges, 440, the edges of shopping centers, 540 interchanges and things like that. So I don't know if it calls for a different approach, but I do think that outside of the downtown core, those traffic safety issues really come to the forefront. You know, people darting in and out of lines of traffic when traffic's queued up off the interstate and that kind of thing. Do you adopt different strategies for enforcement, chief, in different parts of the city? And is that basically an accurate view?
I think you're correct in your observation, and that speaks to the comment that I made earlier about the education piece. So there is quite a bit of education that is deployed, if you will, in terms of where to stand, where not to stand, and not becoming, not getting injured or being a part of a pedestrian related crash at some of those very busy intersections, the interstates in particular. And just through anecdotal observation, 2020, I would say we saw an increase. That has been part of our, crime strategy discussions as well, and how we deal with the increase and address the increase of folk that we are seeing panhandling throughout the city. And checking permits, and most of them are very familiar with the ordinance. So when you do approach them, they are very quick to let you know that they have their permit in hand. And so then it becomes more of an education and a reminder of where they should or should not be standing at that particular location. And so that is, we do spend quite a bit of time educating our community.
This item was brought to committee by a council member who is no longer here. I can't speak to what his interest is or was in this, but if there are no more questions, I would like to suggest that we report this item out with no action taken. And if there's any follow-up questions related to this, let's discuss that in our comment on or our section on homelessness. Is everybody okay with that? All right, I'll make a motion then to report this out with no action taken. Do I have a second? Councilmember Fort has seconded that. All in favor? Okay, clerk, that was a 4-0 vote. Thank you. Our next item is food truck zones. I got that right this time, right, City Manager? Okay. And let's see, I know we're changing folks who will be speaking to this. We'll give everybody a second to get on.
Travis Crane will present this item, Mayor.
Okay. Travis, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me this morning. I've got a brief presentation to run through. First, Travis Crane in Planning and Development to discuss this item related to food truck service in the right-of-way that was brought to you through a petition of citizens at your last meeting. So if you give me a moment, I will open up the presentation and get started. All right, you should see it on your screen. Don't let me know if you can't hear me. Please wave around and let me know.
We've got it, Travis.
All right, excellent. Thank you. So I'll walk through 4 basic topics this morning. The first is the distinction between regulations for food trucks. We do have different sets of regulations depending on whether or not food truck service happens within the right-of-way or on private property. And then we'll focus specifically on the right-of-way program itself, because that's really where this request came from. And then further focus in on the specific request for food service on one particular parking spot within the right-of-way, and then just wrap up with next steps. So just as a reminder, we've got a set of regulations within our Unified Development Ordinance related to food truck service on private property. And this happened through an ordinance in 2012, and that was my entree into food truck regulations for the city. We crafted a set of regulations through an extensive public process through committee review and ultimately city council adoption. And this allows for food truck service on private property. It requires a zoning permit for the food truck and also a permit for the property where the food truck will serve. This allows for daytime and nighttime service on a property. There is an allowance to extend service to 2 a.m. as long as there's not nearby residential to the food truck service. There is a required separation space from the entrance of restaurants, and this is primarily allowed in mixed-use zoning, and there's a limit on number of trucks that can serve on a particular property. And that limit scales based on the size of property. And so the ultimate cap, I believe, is 3 food trucks on a large property. So contrast that to the allowance for food truck service on the right-of-way. Again, this does allow for, or does require a permit for the food truck itself. There is no corresponding permit required for the property since this happens within the right-of-way. However, service is limited only to the hours between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m., although there is an allowance to extend to 8 p.m. on the first Friday of every month. And these reservations or the food truck service happens through a reservation process that is secured through a website, and we'll talk about that just in a moment. So there are 4 food truck spots that are designated in the right-of-way, and you see in the picture here, this is actually one of the spots outside HQ Raleigh. We call it the CAM spot. It's right around the Contemporary Art Museum. The other 3 spots are the state government space that's located on Polk Street. There is a space that is located outside the Department of Motor Vehicles just south of New Bern Avenue. And then this one particular spot on North Street, and that's the subject of our conversation this morning. And this is a new space. Initially, when this program was started, there was a space on Bloodworth Street outside the old House of Swank brick and mortar. When that business moved, we also moved the food truck spot to this location on North Street. So these spaces were identified very intentionally when staff came together in 2016 at the request of City Council. We identified areas in the city where food service was not primarily located in the area. So these were areas that were mostly devoid of restaurants. The intention was to look at a convenient lunchtime service for the surrounding workers. Two of these spaces, both the old House of Swank spot and the Polk Street spot, were requests of adjacent property owners. So those were self-selected by people in and around the area. So I mentioned that these 4 spots are reserved through a website, and staff has contracted with a third-party vendor that contains a website, or that runs a website that contains all of the food truck spots that are available. And so a food truck vendor would go to the website and select a reservation for one of those 4 spots. This happens in advance. I think typically it's between a week and 2 weeks in advance. And there are protections in place so that the same food truck vendor cannot occupy one space over and over and over again. And the intention there was to allow for, obviously, additional food trucks to take advantage of spaces, to offer variety to the people in the area, so that there are some guardrails in place to prevent that. I would note, however, that in 2020, we only had 1 food truck who signed up to use any of these 4 spaces. So full disclosure, the program has seen a dip in its popularity over the past couple of years. So moving on to this specific request at the North Street space, this came to you through a petition of citizens at your last meeting. And I mentioned that this was a relocated food truck space that occurred back in 2018. So the petitioner appeared before the City Council to ask for an extension of the hours of operation for this space. So I mentioned that food truck spaces are allowed between food truck service between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. The petitioner is asking for an extended window to serve through 10 p.m., which would require a change to the city code. I would note that the rationale or the reason behind the petitioner appearing before City Council is that zoning staff had received a complaint from an adjacent property owner that there was food truck service happening outside of the hours of operation. So the petitioner then came to City Council to make the request. So I mentioned that this specific request is for this 1 food truck parking space, and it is for an extension of hours of service at this 1 parking space. This does require adoption of an ordinance. However, because this is a regulation that is contained in the right-of-way, this does not require a UDO text change. And there's a big difference here. So a UDO text change would require a fair amount of research on staff's part, review and recommendation of the Planning Commission, and ultimately a public hearing before the City Council. Changes to the larger city code can happen much more swiftly than that, where there is no Planning Commission review and recommendation, and City Council can simply adopt the ordinance at a meeting and the code is changed. So with that, I'll offer some suggested next steps here. If it is the will of the committee, staff can draft an ordinance and have it ready for the February 2nd City Council meeting. It would modify the hours of operation for this 1 parking space, allowing it for up to 10 p.m. service. This would also require a change to the traffic schedule, which is very specific in the city code. And ultimately, city staff would place a new street sign out at this location just to notify of the new hours. That's all I have for you. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have, and I will stop sharing my screen if I could figure out how to do that. There we go.
Okay, thank you, Travis. David, Councilor Cox, I'm sorry, I'll get to you in a second. I just want to clarify something. When you said one spot was used, does that mean that the same vendor was using one spot, or can you clarify that for me?
Yes, ma'am, that's a great question. So it was one food truck operator secured a permit for any of the 4 spaces. So I don't have the exact data for whether or not the one food truck occupied one space or visited all 4. It gave the food truck operator the allowance to visit all 4 spaces.
Okay, and then the other question I had relates to the space on New Bern Avenue. You know, that was something that we did in response to a request from DMV. With DMV moving from that site, is that still a spot that needs to be kept up?
That's another great question. I don't have the actual usage data at my fingers right now. That's something that staff could look into. We do know whenever a food truck operator secures a reservation for a space, so we could actually look at the data for that space for the past few years and determine whether or not we believe it's a successful space. And if not, we would come back to the city council and offer some suggestions for a relocation.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Cox.
Yes, you mentioned that the citizens petition was brought forward after someone had filed a complaint about them operating after hours. And I was wondering, so I'm curious to know who brought the complaint and what their concerns were. Are they a business owner that's concerned about competition? Is it a citizen that's concerned about noise? What were the specific, do you know the specific issue?
Yes, sir. That's another great question. What I understand from the issue is that, or the complaint is that a resident reached out to zoning enforcement, and the complaint was based on a food truck operating outside of the hours of operation that are allowed in the food truck space. So zoning staff made contact with the food truck operator, and according to staff, as of this morning, they have not observed the truck operating in that space since the complaint. But to your question, I don't know that there was any specificity beyond operation outside of the hours of that are allowed for the food truck.
Councilmember Cox, I am familiar with this. The food truck operator was actually parking the vehicle there, and that was the issue. So if we were to extend hours, you know, I think we need to make it clear that parking the vehicle there, say after 10 p.m. would not be permitted.
Yeah, I'd like to know if there's a way we can find out more about what the neighbors in the area think of this before moving ahead. I guess the question is, how would we do that?
It's the West HOA, so I think we could easily reach out to them. Councilmember Fort.
Can you hear me? Because it keeps going off of you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I guess my question was similar to Councilmember Cox's. I was just curious as to how close this is to a residential area.
It's right below the West, at the corner of North. Like, this is the location where there's currently the person who filed the citizen petition owns a brewery on that corner. And Virgil's is his food truck. And I'm familiar with it because I drive by this area or walk by this area all the time. And the concern was related to the fact that he was parking the vehicle there, like all night. So, yeah. Councilmember Fort, have you yet met with the West?
No, ma'am, I have not.
Okay. The Glenwood South Partnership?
Yes, that group.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? So why don't we do this? Why don't we direct staff to move toward an ordinance change and a review of the spaces, bring that to our next meeting. In the meantime, Councilor Fort, I will be in touch with you and we can reach out to the West HOA. Know a number of residents there and we'll be happy to provide an introduction. Okay.
Thank you.
Is everybody okay with that? All right. Do I need a motion on that? Robin? We provided direction. Do we need a motion? Other than to say,
Sorry, I was finding my mute. Yeah, I think you should have a motion.
okay, I will make a motion to report this out of committee. Having provided staff with direction to bring this forward and also an invitation to meet with the West Homeowners Association. Do I have a second? Seconded by Councilor Fort. Stumbling over myself this morning. Okay, all in favor? Okay, clerk, that passes unanimously. All right, and our next item for today is homelessness. I know we have a number of people joining us for this as well.
And so Larry Jarvis from Housing and Neighborhood will tee this item up. And then we have representatives from Wake County as well as the Partnership to End and Prevent Homelessness. So on the call, Mayor.
Okay, if everybody could get on with their video, that would be helpful.
So good afternoon, Larry Jarvis, Housing Neighborhoods. We do have two guests this afternoon. We have Kim Crawford, who is the Executive Director of the Partnership to End and Prevent Homelessness. She's going to give a very brief presentation on the partnership and the continuum of care and those functions here in Wake County. And then Rena McDowell, the Housing Director for Wake County, will give a brief overview of the county's role and particularly what the response has been to COVID, and then be available to answer any questions that you have. So I can't see Kim here on the screen, but Derek, is Kim teed up to provide her presentation?
I'm here.
Good. All right. Turn it over to you.
Although the share my screen button is grayed out.
Kim, you should have it now.
Okay. Okay. I'm hoping you can all see that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor and city councilors for this opportunity to talk to you about homelessness in the Raleigh Wake continuum of care. Of course, this is a topic that I recently talked to the mayor about that from our conversations, if she can probably tell, is very near and dear to my heart. One thing that we want to explain and go through when we talk about homelessness is how homelessness is dealt with from a high level, systemic level here in our community. So I wanted to talk about what a continuum of care is. What is the homeless continuum of care? The Raleigh Wake Continuum of Care, for example, has been operating for nearly 25 years. A COC, they were created back by HUD back in the mid-90s. Essentially what HUD said was, we should have our communities, those boots on the ground people, making the decisions regarding homelessness. So here in North Carolina, we actually have 12 homeless continuums of care. They, as you can see from the map, most of them are around larger metropolitan areas. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg COC is the largest. The Raleigh Wake COC is the second largest. So what does that mean to us as our community, and who is the partnership? The Raleigh Wake Partnership leads the coalition of organizations, institutions, and homeless service providers in a collaborative, coordinated method and process to work most effectively and efficiently for those experiencing homelessness in our community. The Raleigh Wake Partnership and our role is essentially the consultant for the Wake County Continuum of Care. What the partnership does is we oversee the data collection, which is called the Homeless Management Information System at the local level, and we manage the coordinated access system. Coordinated access, many of you may have heard of coordinated access, coordinated entry, coordinated assessment is the process by which people enter into our homeless crisis response system. So one of the big questions that I was asked to address is some of the reasons why people are homeless, or what are the thoughts around homelessness. I like to call them the lies we believe. And I have a couple of them that I'm going to run through with you. One of the first ones is that the way that to deal with people that are homeless is that they have to follow some sort of step-up continuum of service model, where we first locate those that are homeless, put them in a shelter, move them to transitional housing, teach them how to maintain housing, and then those that satisfactorily graduate are seen as prepared to move into permanent housing. What we can tell you today is there is absolutely no evidence to suggest that this step-up model is required for future housing success. Yet today, billions of dollars are still invested in programs that require this continuum of service. This evidence suggests that this is a very, very expensive approach, which is why in the last several years, HUD has implemented what's called a rapid rehousing program. People can move directly from living outdoors into housing. Doesn't matter if they've been living in the woods, hunkered down in the park, under an underpass, or in a car. They absolutely can be successfully housed from any outdoor location. And we need to keep in mind that shelters are not intended to be therapeutic living environments where a person gets fixed or where they're supposed to learn life skills to be successful in housing. Shelters are intended to provide a temporary, safe place to stay so that people can sort out permanent housing locations. So the best place for a person to get engaged in the programs and services that will help with broader life issues or learning skills is to actually maintain housing. Another one is people must be housing ready. This one is prevalent across the country and in our COC today. Behind this sentiment is the belief that people have to change their behavior or character in order to be worthy of housing. Most often, this means our service providers need to hear some personal claim of acceptance and responsibility to change their social activities or other behaviors, such as drinking. Sometimes it means that they must accept that they're a sinner and accept a personal God as their personal savior in order to get help. People can't be successfully forced into housing. A person must choose to be housed. However, they should not have to change every aspect of their personal being in order to be, quote, ready for housing or to be successful. Ironically, the housing ready model operates under the false premise that if they stay homeless a little while longer, they will somehow be more ready for housing. 3, without building more affordable housing, there's not much we can do about it. Absolutely. More affordable housing is always a good thing. But whenever we say homelessness cannot be ended because there's no affordable housing, we forget the fact that existing in our community today are economically poor people who are housed, not homeless. So we need to ask ourselves, where are they housed? When we talk about building more affordable housing, again, fantastic idea. But what do we do with those that are homeless today? they have to go somewhere, which is just one thing to consider. The COC has now begun a landlord engagement and housing navigation program, which we can talk more about down the road. But it is, in essence, to build relationships with our hundreds of landlords throughout our community, to ask them to help us with this affordable housing crisis and renting one or two of their units at or below fair market rent. We hear this one a lot. Many people are paycheck to paycheck away from homelessness. You know, about 1/3 of our households are cost burdened, with close to 50% of rental households being cost burdened. And of course, some communities, it's worse than that. But while a large percentage of our renters are cost burdened in very troubling ways, i.e. taking money away from other household expenses and impacting food security, we do have to remember that in most communities, it is truly only about 1% of the population of any community is homeless at any point in time. The truth is, homelessness is rarely caused by just one thing. Households may be economically in precarious situations, but when these economic circumstances are coupled with additional trauma, loss of community, or a series of confluence or events over time, that households are then at greater risk of homelessness. And when I mean, what are those other events? Medical crisis, a car breaks down, lack of child care, parent gets sick or the child gets sick, they can't go to daycare, post-traumatic stress, domestic violence, all of these things can play into reasons for homelessness. People just need to be sober to get into housing. This one is also prevalent. So think about this. If everyone in Raleigh who drank in excess on a regular basis or used illicit drugs on a regular basis and became homeless, we would see numbers of homelessness beyond that we have ever seen before, even with the COVID pandemic that we are experiencing right now. The National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence suggests that there are nearly 18 million Americans that have an addiction to alcohol. Meanwhile, on any given night in America, only, and I say that cautiously, 600,000 or so experiencing homelessness, and not all of them are addicted to alcohol. It would seem that there are 17 million people who happen to stay housed despite the manner within which they use alcohol. In our society today, use of substances often gets moralized. People may choose sobriety, and that's fantastic, but it shouldn't be forced on anyone. If we are serious about ending homelessness and want to overcome this myth, we would be well served to teach people how to be housed and use substances, like the other 17 million or so citizens on a nightly basis that do so. We have to end poverty if we're going to end homelessness. In some ways, that's true. Today, over 40 million people are living in economic poverty. As mentioned previously, not all of them are homeless. We should all be on board with restructuring benefits and supports, but focusing on poverty and focusing on ending homelessness are not the same thing. There are mechanisms to get people out of homelessness that will not get them out of poverty. They are not designed to do so, nor should they. The homeless delivery system is not the poverty elimination system. However, if we want people to get out of poverty, housing is a good foundation to start from and more likely to be successful than trying to get people out of poverty while they're homeless. I mean, consider this. The HUD-funded programs fund ending homelessness. They don't fund ending poverty. And then one just quick piece that I added into these slides that we believe, circling back to panhandling. And I will suggest that street-involved behavior and homelessness are not the same thing. A housed person can be street-involved. Street needs assessments have demonstrated that there is only a small percentage of our homeless population who are also panhandling. So with that, there is some data that I would just like to share with you. And the first thing that I do want to lift up is that the only thing that literally ends homelessness is an address. If you have an address, you are not homeless. So when you look in the lower right corner in the big bold red letters, when I say that we need 483 addresses, that means 483 units. We have 483 households today in the current homeless crisis response system that needs a unit. From January 1 to December 30 of last year, our COC served over 11,000 people. 7,100 of them were adults 18 and older. 3,700, close to 3,700 were kids under 17. Of those 471 total people were housed, our average time from when someone enters into the homeless crisis response system to the time that they move in to their new place is 95 days. That's incredibly long. Overall, in our entire COC, all of our programs from street outreach, shelter, rapid rehousing, and prevention, only 18% exited to a positive destination. When you look at just the rapid rehousing, which is short-term housing intervention to move someone from homelessness to permanent housing, 74% of our rapid rehousing programs are exiting to a positive destination, meaning not back into homelessness or back out onto the street. Today, we have 475 shelter beds, but 510 people currently in our shelter system. We have 1,100 households waiting to get into shelter and street outreach. Right now, the wait list to get into our homeless crisis response system is somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. For a single person, you can generally get into a shelter or into a street outreach program in 3 to 5 weeks. Our families are waiting much, much longer. They're 4 to 6 or 7 weeks. So we have a tremendous wait time for people to be getting into the homeless crisis response system. Key metrics that I would suggest that truly measure the success of a community, certainly the length of time homeless. How long does someone have to remain homeless before they can get off the street? Again, like I said, 95 days is the average length of time homeless in our COC today. What are the exits to permanent housing? Permanent housing is the first step to be successful in housing. The higher the exits, the better. We had overall 722 secured housing. That means the 471 are those that got their own lease, got their own apartment. 722 may have moved in with a friend or family. And then what is our return to homelessness today? What is that percentage? Those are the 3 key metrics that we want to look at. Our current return to homelessness right now is 22%. 6 months or less from the time that one is exited from one of our programs. Or 33% if it's between 6 and 9 months. So I think that those are many of the key metrics that can speak to where we are today. I will unshare my screen and be happy to take any questions.
Mayor, would you like Lorena to go ahead and kind of give a brief overview and summary of the county's efforts before we open it up to questions? Mayor Baldwin.
Yeah, sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
I'm going to have to borrow Gail's mic. Counselor Cox had his hand raised. Are you okay waiting to ask that question after Lorena's presentation?
Well, it was just a question for clarification.
Okay, why don't you go ahead?
So the metrics that she's citing, so for example, the PIT count, for example, from January 2020 says 974 persons and 769 households. And then the data that you cited today, that does not include people that are living in hotels. Is that correct?
Yes, it did include people, but again, right now, many of our hotel programs have closed. So they have been transitioning out of shelter into other housing situations.
Okay, you're talking about your hotel program though, right? I'm asking about in general people who are living in hotels because they have no other option, but they're not necessarily being housed in a hotel through your program.
Okay, so I'm not a
Hey,
program.
Kim,
The partnership
excuse
isn't a program. That's for
Kim?
the overall COC.
Okay.
Kim, could you get back on the screen so we can see you?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's much easier to have a conversation when we can all see each other. Kim, what Counselor Cox was asking was, we have some hotels that currently exist and families and people are living there.
That's correct. That's why we have 575 still in our shelter system, and our shelter system technically only has 475 beds. That's where that excess is. Many of them are in hotels.
Okay.
But
there are many others who are living in hotels that aren't in your program.
In any COC program, what we know today is that we have that 500 number in hotels today. Not my program, in all of the programs in Wake County.
In the programs, I'm talking about people who are not in a program.
If they're not in a program and we don't know about them, then they're not in these numbers.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Okay, sorry.
And maybe Lorena could provide some clarification on that. Lorena, if you will give your presentation, I just want to say that Lorena has my mom's name, which is a very unusual name. We kind of bonded over that. So anyhow, whenever I say your name, it reminds me of my mom. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. It's really good to see everyone again. It's been a while. We were not asked to submit slides today. However, we did submit a rather wordy document to Larry, just kind of explaining all of the things that Wake County has been working on over the past almost year with the COVID response. I'm going to summarize that a little bit for you here real quickly, and then I'm happy to take questions afterwards. At the onset of COVID-19, it was really clear to us that there was going to be an economic crisis to follow this. Housing leadership quickly began conversations with municipal leaders, service providers, and community advocates to hear their perspectives about how they thought this economic pinch would affect the housing security here in Wake County. In April of 2020, with all these conversations in mind, I drafted the House Wake Strategic Plan. That is the county's plan to address the housing crisis that COVID-19 would significantly exacerbate, since we already had one, and to also use that funding and the momentum to address some longstanding gaps in our system. House Wake is designed to roll out in 3 specific phases. Phase 1 of House Wake is focused on those who are most at risk, so those who are unsheltered or homeless. Obviously, by definition, they could not shelter and remain safe from catching COVID-19 or spreading it within our community. So we focused there first. The services that we funded through House Wake were phase 1 were many. We funded a 1-number housing system for the Access Hub and partnered with the Partnership to End and Prevent Homelessness for that. That is something our community has needed for a long time. We just didn't have really the capacity or the funding to do it. So now in Wake County, if you are facing a housing crisis or an emergency, you can call 1 number or email 1 email. And you've got people who we fund that are trained to ask right questions to understand what's happening in your current instance of housing insecurity and to get you to the right resource in our community to get you the support that you need, rather than having to call all around town and email commissioners or council people. There really is one number now. All of our agencies are working with the partnership so that they can provide direct electronic referrals wherever possible, or get them onto the wait list for shelter if that is necessary. We also funded the housing navigation and landlord engagement team, again, partnering with the partnership to end and prevent homelessness. This is a team of staff who are trained to work with our landlords, help them understand the importance of working with our population and the benefits of working with our population and using our funding. Many landlords are now realizing that if they were partnering with us before for either vouchers or just for our direct assistance, that they would not be seeing a decrease in their income that they're receiving right now, because our programs have not stopped. And so this team is having that conversation with landlords. Also really important is a database that they have put together where they can collect the vacant units that are available in our community, and landlords willing to work with folks who are having an issue accessing housing. That's really important because our case managers across our whole system have been significantly bogged down just trying to find a unit. And a lot of the time they would spend case managing and helping where other supports it doesn't exist, because their capacity is spent looking for a new home for this person. So this team helps them to do that. And so they don't provide any direct assistance. They're just working with the landlords and working with case managers to get folks housed. They're also able to tell folks at the beginning what landlords are willing to accept and what they're not, which saves a lot of time. So whether they're willing to accept, credit barriers, criminal histories, it makes it a lot easier and streamlines really where our energy should be going for the folks that we're helping, since we know who will be willing to work with them and who will not. We also launched the Oak City Cares Hygiene Program. That is the trailers that you would have seen outside of Oak City Cares that provided showers and laundry service to those who were still not able to access shelter services in our community. We wanted to make sure they were able to remain clean and take care of their personal hygiene. We are now in the process of providing the partnership funding to purchase these units on their own, so the community will have these permanently. And so we will be able to continue that service for the community beyond COVID if necessary. We were also able to create over 250 new temporary shelter units in our community. This happened either through partnering with other partner agencies to help them to expand the space. An important note there is that all of our shelters, to ensure that the folks who were in our shelters weren't contracting COVID-19 and it wasn't spreading in our shelters, they had to reduce some of their capacity and properly social distance. We then came in and said, how can we give you some funding, provide some additional service supports so you can safely increase and still social distance in your space? And so we did that as well. I'm incredibly proud of our service providers. Here in Wake County, we've had very, very, very low rates of positive cases in our shelters, and no major outbreaks, knock on all types of wood. In many communities, this is the case. It spreads very quickly in this population, and they are prone to very negative outcomes, as they often have other underlying health issues. So that was very successful. Another thing that we did that created 200 units of temporary housing for shelter was our H2H program, or Hotels to Housing program. This was born of our Emergency Operations Command, who quickly stood up 2 full hotels, or a few hotels, to bring people in that had co-occurring health issues and pre-existing issues that would have exacerbated COVID, and shelter them there. Those folks were pulled out of our shelters across Wake County and held in these separate units so they could be really safe from catching COVID-19. When the EOC shut down here, or pared down for Wake County, the housing department took that task on. We brought it down to 2 full hotels that we rented out for many months. In this hotel, we didn't just shelter people, and that's the most important point I think we can make about the program. This program is probably the most well-funded shelter program I've ever been able to be a part of and help run. And because of that, it was incredibly successful at permanently housing folks. All the hotels and all 200 plus rooms were paired with case management for every single household in those rooms. The case managers were held to a 1:25 or less ratio for case management, providing intensive case management services. Every single room was also paired with direct assistance, which included security deposits, first month's rent, additional rent if needed, and help to get their utilities turned on in their new locations. They also had nurses on site, behavioral health partners came and helped us on site. Prescription assistance, transportation, a whole host of supports. And what that program was able to do in really only over about 4 or 5 months of running the programs was to permanently house over 200 households. close to 300 people. So incredibly successful model. That program did sunset in December, which was the original design of the Treasury funds, and that's what we used to fund that program. However, no person in this program was exited back to the street, as you may have heard in other communities that sunset their hotel programs. Every single person in our program was either permanently housed or moved into another shelter bed or another service in our community. So no one was asked to exit to the street. We are now working with our agencies to continue that case management for folks who are still seeking services, and the direct assistance is still there for the families we weren't able to house. One point I will make, which I think goes along with Kim's presentation, is that the biggest gap in our community right now are families who have co-ed structures. We do not have many shelters who are willing to take families that have a male and female head of household, or even, a son over the age of 18. And so that is a huge gap in our community, and we're not able to keep our families intact, which obviously creates more of an issue for that family that's already in an emergency situation. And so we are working as a county right now to figure out how we can help support some expansion of services in that area. But none of our families were separated. Families that we could not get into shelters, we are still funding in hotels right now, and they still have case management and money to get rehoused while we look for permanent housing solutions for them. We also, for all of our housing programs, all of our emergency shelter programs, we partner with the Green Chair Project, and we're able to provide them funding for up to 500 households. And so every single household who's going through any of the shelter services right now and getting permanently housed, be them Wake County or partner agencies, they are able to access fully furnished households when they move out into their new homes, as funded by the county in partnership with Green Chair Project. So we're incredibly proud of that. That every person's been getting housed since May, I think it is, in our community, not only gets a unit, but a home, a furnished home. We also funded street outreach services for up to 250 individuals in our community. That's phase one of House Wake. Phase two of our strategic plan is focused on the eviction crisis. We launched this phase on September 29th of 2020. And we've been stabilizing housing for Wake County residents who are facing eviction specifically due to a loss in income related to COVID-19. This phase is composed of 3 distinct interventions. Intervention 1 is a partnership with Telemon Corporation, who's our program administrator, and they administer our pre-designed program, which is an agreement between the county, the renter, and the landlord to receive up to 6 months of rent on the renter's behalf and to forgive other debt that renter may have, as well as provide them with a 25% reduction in rent for 3 months following the program support. Obviously, the landlord has to also agree not to evict. To date, this intervention has accepted over 2,000 applications, with half of them already have been being approved or paid out. I should note that the HOPE program the state launched was structured very similar to ours, and also took 2,000 applications in Wake County and is working through those now. So right now there are approximately 4,000 households in Wake County that are being either have been helped or in the process of being helped through these eviction prevention programs. That's intervention 1. For our program, we went a little deeper. And so for intervention 2, it's a partnership with Legal Aid of North Carolina. They're providing legal services pro bono to Wake County residents whose landlords do not agree to intervention 1 and who will certainly face legal proceedings. Wake County also provided legal aid with $1 million out of our ESG CV funding to negotiate settlement. So all of that funding is just for residents, for settlement with landlords. At this stage, in order to stop the eviction process. To note, legal aid will not negotiate a better deal in intervention 2 than the landlord would have been able to receive under intervention 1, so as not to incentivize them to not agree to intervention 1. Intervention 3 is relocation assistance for residents who could not be stabilized under interventions 1 or 2. Our pre-existing Wake County eviction prevention team has been sort of repurposed or is doing this purpose as well on top of their other work. And they've been allotted $400,000 in ESG CV funding. That funding is being used to move residents into new homes in an attempt to avoid literal homelessness if intervention 1 and 2 are not able to be successful. Support includes case management, housing location assistance, as well as direct assistance to help with security deposits and some additional rental support. Our current program designed for intervention 1 is scheduled to stop accepting applications on January 31st. At this time, the program will temporarily stop accepting applications. However, the aid and support for renters that have applied by this date will continue. And under President Biden's new extension of the national eviction moratorium through the end of March, we should be able to ensure that renters are not displaced while we work through final details of the new federal funding. We anticipate being able to reopen the application, utilizing this new funding prior to the expiration of the new moratorium. We've been in discussions with the city of Raleigh and our partners over there to partner with the county and Telamon on this sort of new round. With their allocation, the city is receiving approximately $14 million under the new federal funding stream. We, as the county, are receiving 19. So in our community, there will be a minimum of 33 million more coming, specifically earmarked for eviction prevention. And we are looking to partner together to streamline this for the community. It should be really as simple as we reopen the application. There will be some differences in the program based on the federal funding requirements. But externally, the community should see a date that will reopen the program and they can begin applying again. And we will, on the back end, pull from either the city pot or the county pot, depending on where they reside. We are also in conversations with the state to determine how the state will allocate their portion of the funding here in Wake County. And we are very hopeful that they will allow, based on a population formula, allow that funding to come directly to us so we can just pair it all together in our community and continue to roll and support folks in our community through this current design. In addition to our Wake County strategic plan, we've launched a number of other initiatives to support the community. South Wilmington Street Center, our men's shelter, has secured resources to expand their efforts in case management. We've now enabled them to have a skilled staff that refocus their efforts away from classroom instruction and more advanced individualized services in low barrier and housing first environments. So men who are experiencing homelessness can move more quickly to regain stability and live independently in their housing of their choosing. And we have shortened, lengthened times of episodes of homelessness and increased our exit to permanent housing through this design. We also partner with Triangle Family Services to provide street outreach. They provided services to over 140 citizens to date to further engage people who are living in places not meant for human habitation at this time, but are unwilling to come inside for emergency shelter or can't access it. Outreach specialists provide street-based assessments, case management, referral services, and emergency survival supplies. Wake County's Housing Resource Team has also launched a full array of diversion services to prevent homelessness for people seeking shelter by helping them to identify immediate housing arrangements. So sometimes that's, getting family to work with them, or sometimes it's reunification, even if it means outside of Wake County. If necessary, we connect them with services and financial assistance to help them return to permanent housing and relocation assistance is as needed for medium or short-term rental assistance. And again, each of those households are also eligible for furniture through our partnership with Green Chair Project. In June of 2020, Urban Ministries completed the construction of their new expanded Helen Wright shelter. Wake County provided $2.4 million for those upfits. And in addition to that, Urban Ministries is running 2 other temporary shelters funded by Wake County in order to temporarily increase shelter space for homeless single women at this time due to COVID-19. And last, but certainly not least, in April of 2020, our Equitable Housing and Community Development Division created and implemented the COVID-19 Loan Relief Program for county-funded borrowers, both homeowners and developers. This program grants county-funded borrowers with a COVID relief hardship forbearance for 90 days with an option for an additional 90 days. It also allows for a waiver of late fees and suppressed credit reporting so that this time does not hurt their credit status. And I believe that is it at a high level, sort of nutshell of what Wake County has been up to. Happy to take the question.
Lorena, I have a couple of questions. First one relates to the white flag emergencies that we've had in our community. I've been on a lot of the email strings, and it seems like we've had a struggle with that. Where are we with that right now?
Thank you for mentioning that. I actually left that off my list. So early on when white flag became an issue, and we knew that it would be, to premise sort of this conversation, it's important to note the way that white flag usually works. Normally in our communities, when white flag is called because it's too cold or too hot, or there's some kind of weather situation, our shelters will open up additional sort of floor space, and they'll put mats down and folks can just come off the street in there. That could not happen in a COVID-19 environment because we can't bring them into shelters and potentially spread COVID in the shelters. So in order to find a way around this, Wake County and the partnership had conversations on ways that Kim and her team could step up and just help us figure out how to create a space. And so we were early on using our ESG funding and then Treasury funding and helping the partnership who found some space in order to just create really a kind of a cot style open congregate living space just for folks to drop in at night and stay warm. And so we did do that. We knew early on that this was a lot for the partnership to do, and it's really not what they do for our community. They are systems based, not programmatic based. And so we asked Urban Ministries to partner with us. And so because they are a shelter provider. And so now in Wake County, Urban Ministries is actually running the shelter the partnership was able to help stand up. And so they transitioned from the partnership to Urban Ministries. The county continues to fund every single night, including security and additional needs for shelter staff for Urban Ministries in order to ensure that there are beds available for White Flag. My understanding is they have not had an issue with having enough beds at this time for White Flag. And I think Urban Ministries has been doing a great job running it for us.
Okay, thank you. My other question relates to the hotel that was that you partnered with Triangle Family Services on. As you mentioned, more than 200 people were successfully housed, and that program has come to an end. What are y'all thoughts, or what are y'all thinking about that program? It was highly successful. It provided supportive housing. I also know that it's expensive, but it works. And what I've seen in other communities, they have actually spent more money on those, like they'll pick specific like high users and it saves them money.
Mm-hmm.
So with the supportive services and whatnot, what are you thinking in the future? I mean, a lot of hotels right now are hurting. I'm not sure if any would be for sale. But is that an opportunity for a partnership with the city for this type of service that actually has been highly effective?
Yeah. So a few comments there. Our hotels, we had two. One was led by Triangle Family Services, and those was for our single households.
Right.
Men and women. The second was for families and folks fleeing domestic violence, and that hotel was manned by 3 agencies that work together, both Interact, Salvation Army, and Families Together. Those 2 hotels together were able to permanently house over 200 households. Yes, and we are super excited about it. It was incredibly successful. It also was incredibly expensive. Not to say that we still shouldn't do it, because you see the outcomes, right? And those 200 people are no longer, rolling around trying to access service in our community. That is a little bit separate, though, from our permanent supportive housing model, which I believe is the model that you're talking about, that we get a lot of data from communities that say, look, it's really expensive to allow these folks to keep cycling through our systems, right? These are typically folks who need more services. They're not just looking for shelter and just looking for housing. Typically, they're folks who will not be able to stabilize on their own. Folks who have vouchers, we call them our familiar faces here. They may cycle through the prisons, the hospitals, emergency, and it is incredibly expensive. It's also just not the right thing to do to let them keep cycling through that. And so for our department, long before COVID-19, a couple of years ago, we started planning for a whole new division. And we do have that division now. Last year, it was permanently filled out. It is our Permanent Housing and Supportive Services division under my department. It's led by Diane Salento. And that team is actually mobilizing a ton of new resources and services for folks who are in permanent supportive housing or who need it. They are increasing vouchers. They are decreasing case management sizes down to a manageable amount. They need more intensive services. We are taking our Cornerstone building, which was kind of similar to Oak City Cares, but it was like Oak City Cares Light before there was all the service at Oak City Cares. That will now be the sort of the front door for permanent supportive housing services in Wake County. And design construction is beginning on that. As a matter of fact, they were there this morning. making those plans. There are 18 units above that building that will now be used for sort of bridge housing to help folks either connect with mental health services while they're starting to get housed or get on medications, whatever they need. And then we will partner with agencies to move them out, either through an agency voucher that has case management through agencies and vouchers that we have in our department. We do have over 300 permanent supportive housing vouchers in our department. The current issue, however, with this is we have 300 vouchers, but we don't have 300 units in our community and landlords that are willing to take those vouchers. And so what you end up having is really a person who has finally got the service they need and kind of this golden ticket and nobody wants it. That was before COVID-19. So we did a couple of things. The first is that in our tax credit process, we built in a requirement for a 10% set aside for permanent supportive housing vouchers on top of the state's requirement. This was so that we had space for our vouchers in our new development. The first of those developments, this began almost 3 years ago. The first of those developments should come online at the end of this year. So we're pretty excited about that. To date, we have, I believe, over 500 units through the last 3 years of tax credit cycles that are earmarked specifically for permanent supportive housing units. So currently we have more vouchers than units. In a few years, we'll have more units than vouchers. And so we'll look to increase our vouchers and case management to go along with them.
Okay, I have another question, but I want to see if any other council members have questions. Councilor Buffkin?
Thank you, Mayor, and Kim and Lorena, thanks for being with us today. I wanted to share briefly that I've done some work in this area at the State Department of Health and Human Services on the 10-year plan to end homelessness, and have become something of an acolyte for Philip Mangiano and the ideas that developed out of the coordinated planning. So I don't say that to boast or brag, but to say that a lot of shared passion for the issues that we've been talking about today. Kim, I was ready to strike up the amen chorus when you were dispelling the myths about homelessness. So thank you for sharing all that. I've got several questions. First, I've seen some conflicting reports on the point in time counts for last year and whether or not they're going to happen this year in light of the COVID situation. Could you share with us how that went last year? Were we able to complete our count last year? And what's our plan for doing it or not doing it this year, or doing it safely this year?
Well, great question. I can say that we did do a point in time count last year. It's mandated, so you don't really have a choice. How it went is as good as the data that's currently posted out there. I wasn't with the partnership then, so I can't necessarily speak to the specifics on the day of the count. But the data collection from those that went out and did the count has been collected and has been submitted to HUD. This year, HUD did provide an opportunity for all COCs across the country to submit waivers. One, either to not do a count at all, or two, to do a modified count, specifically using data, or three, going ahead with the standard point in time count. The Wake County COC decided that we would do the option number 2 and with the modified count. So the HMIS team has gone back and forth with HUD, verifying our data to be sure that the data is accurate. We are currently working with our street outreach teams to be sure that the data that we have and then the subsequent verification for the following 14 days will substantiate the logic that we are following moving forward when we submit our point in time count. The point in time count is set to happen on Wednesday, the 27th. So yes, we are doing a point in time count. Yes, we are working with our street outreach providers to ensure that we have all of the data input by our street outreach providers. We have also reached out to our service providers that do not participate in the homeless management information system to get their data as well. So we have been approved that waiver, and we will be continuing to move forward with the point in time count this year. We do anticipate, obviously, that it will be higher in years past because of the COVID pandemic, though.
Councilmember Cox?
So you mentioned that you're going to do a count, but it's going to be a modified count. In what way is it going to be modified?
We're using data. We're using the historical data from throughout the past year.
How is that different?
We aren't physically going out to count people. We aren't physically going out to the campsites, to the encampments.
Okay. So I guess I'm unclear as to how you actually conduct a count.
We're going based on the number of people that are unsheltered, that have called for referrals, or that are currently in the street outreach programs.
Okay.
So that would be the unsheltered population. So we have the unsheltered population that our street outreach providers are currently working with, plus those that have called in and are waiting for a referral.
Okay, so that brings me to my next question, if I may. You mentioned that there are, currently there are 1,101 families on the wait list.
Households,
and it
yes.
takes 5 to 6 weeks to get through the wait list. So where are those families living while they're on the wait list?
They are living everywhere. They're living in their cars. They're living in camps. They're living with friends. So they're anywhere that they can find space.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Buffkin?
Thank you. Shifting gears a little bit, this 95-day transition period that we've been discussing to get people in more, to move them along into more permanent housing situations. I suppose some of that's just, unavoidable. You got to clean a unit, prepare it for the next person, so that takes some time. Are there other friction points, like, for example, transitioning utility billing? What's the holdup there? I'm just trying to get a better understanding of why this 95 days is so long and what we might be able to do to shrink it a little bit.
So I can see Lorena smiling, as I am as well. That is the sole purpose of the Housing Navigation Unit and landlord engagement. While we have plenty of people ready to rent, we don't have the number of units. We don't have the landlords that support, or they still have many of those lies that we believe. So they have paying tenants right now that are alcoholics, but a homeless person clearly must be an alcoholic, so therefore I can't rent to them. Some of those kinds of beliefs. Many of our landlords want our tenants, the people that are currently our prospective tenants, let's just say, want them to be housing ready. They believe that they should be housing ready, not housing first. So they believe that our shelter's responsibility is to fix them before they send them to the landlords. On the flip side, what Wake County and the partnership and the COC are currently trying to do is to meet one-on-one with landlords, certainly not face-to-face, but virtual as best we can, phone call, cold calls to as many landlords as we can to talk to them about, okay, we have, Councilman Buffkin, you have a 20-unit apartment complex, and we're going to have a conversation with you, and we're going to say, hey, we have this affordable housing crisis. Can you help us deal with that? I don't want you to give me 20 of your units. I want you to give me 1 or 2 of your units at or below fair market rent. If we can get hundreds of landlords, and we do, we have over 700 landlords and property owners in our county today, to have everybody give us 1 or 2, then we can all effectively address this need and significantly drop down the wait time. The way that the Housing Navigation Landlord Engagement Program is set up today is that you sign a lease with one of our prospective tenants. You will get an incentive bonus based on the term of the lease. If you have one of our prospective tenants sign a 1-year lease, you will get a $750 incentive bonus check. On the flip side of that, we also have funds set aside for risk mitigation, so that if you rent to Kim, and Kim, and 10 of her favorite people moved into that unit, and my lease was only with 1 person, and I need to move out, but I damaged the unit, We have risk mitigation funds in place so that we can help you repair that unit, turn it over, and get it available for rent right away. So to our property owners, our landlords, no harm, no foul. They get incentivized for someone to move in, and we will help them turn that unit so that they can rent to someone else. Now, what we would prefer is that unit stay within the housing navigation program so that you also don't have to advertise. If you have someone moving out, boom, we have someone ready to move right back in. So the more of those available units that we can get, the shorter the time in the homeless crisis response system. Exactly to Lorena's point, we need to slow down going into the system and speed up going out. And that's how we will shorten that time and shorten the numbers of people in the system altogether.
Great, thank you. More of a unit supply problem. I got it. So my final question, if I may, is about a specific population within the homeless population. That's our nation's veterans. The planning around ending homelessness had focused on some of these groups. We've talked about some of them, but we haven't talked about veterans today. And that's an area where I think we've had a lot of success, but still have a lot of work to do, recognizing these folks bring a unique set of issues to their situation. So I wonder if you could just, ladies, update us on how we're doing with our homeless veteran population and what we might need to do to achieve the goal of getting all of our nation's war heroes housed.
So I would love to hear the answer for that, but I've been told we are out of time. RTN needs to prepare for the 1:30 committee meeting for economic development. We are going to keep this in committee and continue the discussion. We'll get with the city manager and with Larry Jarvis to see what next steps are. Councilor Fort had to drop off. She had another meeting. I want to thank Lorena and Kim for being here with us today, providing us with that very extensive update. And we will be back in touch to figure out how we can all work together. Councilmember Buffkin, if somebody could provide an answer to your important question, or we can take it up at the next meeting, that would be terrific. Okay, Larry, I'm going to leave this up to you now. If you could follow up, and we will keep this in committee.
Yes, and if you'd like, what we can do is put the report that Lorena referenced in the manager's update on Friday. And I think there is actually reference within that report to efforts towards housing veterans.
Mm-hmm. And one other thing that I think needs to be addressed is Lorena mentioned the gap that we have, and that really is with families. So that's ways that I think that we can work together to support families who need housing. So with that said, I want to thank everybody for being here. We will take this up at a future meeting and continue to work together. So this meeting is now adjourned. And I, again, thank everybody for being here.
Thank you.